Hey everyone, this is Connor. Welcome back to week 6 of the Big River Running Summer Speedwork Commuter podcast titled Sustainable Ambition. In our last episode, we broke down what it means to be a holistic runner, talking about things like allostatic load, roll strain, and the psychological friction that can happen when our running identity collides with our messy, real-world responsibilities. But after that episode dropped, I started to think about a question that could definitely come up from a lot of high-achieving runners. And the question is, if I dial back the intensity of my running identity and I become more flexible and accepting of my life outside of training, am I going to lose my edge? In other words, am I watering down my ambition? And that's a completely valid fear. In competitive sports culture, we are often led with this false dichotomy of a choice. We're told that you either have to be an obsessive, single-minded warrior who sacrifices everything, lives at altitude, no other jobs, would do anything for a PR, or you're just a casual hobby jogger who doesn't really care about performance. Today, we're here to discuss this and dismantle that myth. Sports psychology tells us that sustainability and high-level ambition are not mutually exclusive. They're actually dependent on each other. And today is going to be that deep dive follow-up into this topic. We're going to explore how to build an athletic identity that allows us to chase these massive goals without burning our life to the ground and everything else going to the wayside. And we're going to redefine what a successful, healthy season actually looks like when you look past the results or the clock at the finish line. All right, so getting started today, let's tackle the science of ambition first. How do we want big things from ourselves without letting that desire become utterly toxic? In sports psychology, a massive breakthrough in this area came from researcher Robert Vallerand and his work around the dualistic model of passion, in which he basically argues that passion isn't just one blanket emotion of constant intensity, but rather it splits into two distinct types. You have obsessive passion and harmonious passion. Let's break these two down. So we have obsessive passion, which is what happens when an activity completely controls us. If you have an obsessive passion for running, your self-worth is entirely contingent on it. It's a type of person where they go for a run on vacation not because they get enjoyment, but they'll feel terrible if they don't do it. You run because you feel an uncontrollable urge to protect your identity as a runner. You feel massive anxiety when you miss a day. You train through obvious injuries, red flags, and even when you know that cutting back would be better for you and your mood, and the entire week dictates on whether your last workout went perfectly. And here's the irony. People often think obsessive passion is the secret to elite performance, but that's really not the case based on what we know from the literature. What the literature actually tells us is that obsessive passion can actually place a ceiling on our progression. It creates so much performance anxiety, fear of failure, that you ultimately end up emotionally exhausted, overtrained, and far more likely to drop out of the sport entirely. Harmonious passion, on the other hand, occurs when running is fully integrated into your life as a conscious, autonomous choice. You don't run because you have to prove your worth. You run because you choose to see what your body can do and because you genuinely enjoy it. Research shows that athletes operating from a place of harmonious passion are generally going to experience higher levels of flow. So that's when we get into that state where we're just really deeply in concentration, enjoyment, and things are coming naturally. And you're also going to have better relationship health outside of the sport and greater long-term performance gains. Now, why is this? What Valorant concluded is that when your identity is multidimensional, taking a massive athletic risk on a race day, so choosing to make that big move early on in the race, or choosing to even be in a situation where you can fail is not going to be as terrifying. If you blow up at mile 20, it might hurt your pride a little bit, but it doesn't break your soul because it is not who you are. You are safe to fail, which actually means you are more free to perform, which in sports psych we know is also one of the greatest facilitators of our best performance. Sustainable ambition means letting running be a meaningful part of who you are, not the entirety. And this idea of harmonious passion versus obsessive passion is actually something that I've lived myself in my own running journey. So for my junior year and even late on into my sophomore year with running, it largely was a case of obsessive passion, where things were always about race results and how can I maximize every single last gain to try and win. And it's okay to have that desire to win, but it became a point where running was my identity and winning, rather, was my identity, not just the act of running was something that I enjoyed. So then every time I had a bad race, it would kind of snowball into something that was a lot bigger than it actually was. Same thing even with just a bad workout or getting a bad split on a lap, because it felt like an attack to my identity. And ultimately, it led to me quitting the sport early on, midway through my junior year. Contrast that, on the other hand, with my freshman year of college, which was arguably my best season for a number of factors, but one that I attribute it to was overall my expectations were low and my passion was much more harmonious. I was doing it because I enjoyed it, and out of high school, I felt like this training environment was super positive for me, filled with lots of enriching relationships. And honestly, I did not care so much about the results. I was more process-driven of no one expects a lot out of me as a freshman, and ironically, it ended up being my best season. So I think that's just one story that indicates how harmonious passion is actually more facilitative of our performance than obsessive passion can be, even though you would think it's the opposite. Within our sport at the elite ranks, rightfully so, a lot of attention is placed on full-time professional athletes, but I think within that, it can be easy to lose how impressive it is what some people do who are considered sub-elites that is really impressive when you think about the context of which they work from and what it proves for the average runner and what they can take away. And so the example I want to give right now is Marty Hare. So Marty's a 2:08 marathoner. He won the marathon project in 2020 against a field of full-time pros. But during his peak training years, unlike his competitors, he wasn't at altitude, and he wasn't just running. He was a full-time anesthesiologist assistant student working grueling shifts in the hospital and raising 3 young daughters with his wife. He didn't have that luxury of a frictionless schedule where he was at altitude getting 8 hours of sleep. He's waking up at ungodly hours to hit these 100-plus mile weeks, then heading straight into the operating room. And when they interviewed Marty and asked him, how'd you pull this off? He explicitly pointed out that his demanding career kept him grounded. He didn't have time to overanalyze a bad workout or stress about the upcoming race. And so running was his release valve from that high stakes environment of medicine, and medicine was his reality check from running. So it was this reciprocal relationship that ultimately kind of fueled his own harmonious passion instead of an obsessive passion for either being in the operating room or running itself. Marty is not a compromise athlete. He's not lacking in ambition. He's executing this world-class performance precisely because his life is rich enough to absorb all of these different shockwaves that come from when you have these poor or excellent athletic performances. And this just shows that even though he's at the total extreme of a guy who has his time totally filled up, he still could do it in a way that was healthy for his running. Marty's story leads us now to our second big topic for today, and that's how do we evaluate progress? If we drop that rigid obsessive focus on numbers, what are we left with of how do we actually define what a healthy season or a successful season actually looks like? So to answer that, we're going to turn to achievement goal theory, which is originally developed by John Nichols. The literature breaks athletes down into 2 primary goal orientations. One is ego orientation, the other is task orientation. An ego-oriented runner evaluates success by comparing themselves to others or an absolute unyielding, rigid external standard, like a specific finishing time, an exact Boston qualifying mark, a certain place in the race. If they hit that time, that place, that mark, the season was a success. If they miss it by 5 seconds due to a headwind on race day, an unexpected side stitch, their shoe blowing up midway through the marathon, their entire 4-month block is considered a catastrophic failure, not something to be proud of. On the other hand, a task-oriented runner, or what for our sake we'll call a process-oriented runner, evaluates success based on personal mastery, skill acquisition, and effort. Now, don't take this the wrong way. Being task-oriented doesn't mean you don't care about your finish time. It just means you don't let a singular time or race result hold the monopoly over the evaluation of your hard work. A truly healthy season, and honestly an authentic way of evaluating one, requires us to zoom out beyond the final result for our peak race. When you evaluate your next training cycle, here are a couple of alternative metrics one could take into account that I find helpful. The first one is a simple question, and that's, was I able to stay calm even when I got tired and fatigued? In other words, did you get better at navigating the dark spot late in a race or hard workout? Did you practice better internal self-talk or develop healthy coping strategies? And did you do this rather than panicking or throwing in the towel? If you did kind of learn how to grow and do those different things, then that is success. That is something that you can carry forward into your next training block and build upon. Because again, we can't control that outcome, but those processes that you developed are going to help you get to that outcome you want later on. The second way we can evaluate the success of a training cycle is consistency and adaptation. Did you successfully manage your total stress and training load? And not just training, notice I also said stress. So that's emotional stress from work, family, etc. If a work crisis popped up, did you have the maturity to adapt your training plan without it becoming something that you became guilty over? Additionally, if you had an injury, were you able to successfully adapt? And within that, you can look back at that training plan and say, yeah, I adapted here, but I needed to, and ultimately that was the right choice for me long term. And that is another skill that you can take into your next training cycle. And overall, taking note of how your body responds to training at different points and under different stresses, so that way you can modify it for later. You've always learned something that way. The last way we can evaluate our training cycle is looking at our relationships and system health. Did you get to the starting line with your relationships that are important to you intact? Did you effectively communicate with your partner or your family about your training needs? And did you make sure that the pursuit of this goal in running didn't leave a trail of relational carnage in its wake? Did you find time for that balance while still protecting what's important to you? That is something that's super important, because at the end of the day, if you take away running from an injury or just even at a certain point not being able to hit the same results that we once did, those are the things that you are left with. When you finish a season where you stayed healthy, improved your mental toolkit and ability to cope with stress, and deepened your connection to the important relationships that you have, that is an objective, high-performance victory, and that is something that's greater than the clock or any result from a given Saturday or Sunday. As we wind down today's episode, I want to leave with something that is important. Ambition is a beautiful thing. That desire to see how fast we can move our body over a mile, 5K, marathon, whatever the distance is a gift and something that should be honored. But if you treat that ambition like a wildfire that burns through everything else you value, eventually it consumes the oxygen that you need to survive. Building that sustainable running identity is about protecting and ultimately having control over that flame. It's about recognizing that you are allowed to want big, audacious things for yourself on the track or the road, while simultaneously honoring your roles as a family member, professional, student, friend, whatever is important to you. Give yourself permission to have that multidimensional life, and let your career give you perspective when running is tough, and let running give you that alternative avenue when life feels heavy. Expand your scorecard for how you evaluate the success of a season, focusing on that process of personal mastery. And remember that the most successful athlete isn't always just the one that crosses first. Oftentimes, it's the one who gets to the end of a season healthy and fulfilled, and that's not always the same as the person who won. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Big River Running Summer Speedwork Commuter podcast, and I'll see you out there. Bye-bye.